The first time death brushed against Emily Carter, it came disguised as love. The night had been still, the street outside her window quiet. But inside her modest two-bedroom home, the walls shook with violence. A lamp shattered against the floor, spraying shards like tiny daggers across the hardwood. Somewhere in the chaos, a phone buzzed and then fell silent, its cracked screen glowing dimly as though mocking her helplessness, and above her, pinning her, suffocating her, was the man she once thought she couldn't live without. Daniel Ross's face hovered inches above her own, twisted with fury. His hands locked around her throat, squeezing, and every second that passed dragged Emily closer to the edge of darkness. Her nails raked at his arms, leaving angry red streaks. Her legs kicked against the floor, searching for leverage. But he was stronger, heavier, and driven by a rage that seemed almost inhuman. "Stop fighting me," he hissed, his voice strangled by his own adrenaline. But of course she couldn't stop, not when her lungs screamed for air, when her vision blurred at the edges, when her body knew that stillness meant death. The neighbors heard at the crash, the muffled screams, the sound of fists striking flesh. A woman across the street paused her late-night television and moved to her window, frowning. The noise didn't stop. It grew sharper, more desperate. Moments later, she was on the phone with 911, her voice trembling as she told the operator, "Something's happening next door. I think she's being attacked inside the house." Emily's salvation came, not from her own strength but from the interruption of fate, the pounding on the front door. Startled Daniel, the sound was sudden, authoritative, and for a split second, he froze. Emily seized the fraction of opportunity, sucking in a ragged gasp of air. Her throat burned. Her chest heaved, but she screamed raw, hoarse, primal. That scream cut through the night and bled into the ears of her neighbors. Daniel's eyes widened. Panic flickered across his face. Without another word, he bolted for the back door, the slam of his exit echoing through the house. Emily crumpled onto the floor, her body racked with violent coughs, tears streaming down her face. She pressed her palms to the wooden boards, trying to ground herself, to believe that she was still alive. Minutes later, flashing blue and red lights painted the walls of her home. Officers moved in quickly, voices sharp with urgency. "Mom, can you hear me? Are you injured?" She tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. Her throat was bruised, her voice fractured. The paramedics wrapped her in a blanket, slipped an oxygen mask over her face, and eased her onto the gurney. On the way to the hospital, one of the officers leaned close. "Do you want to press charges?" The words cut into her fogged mind. Press charges. It sounded simple, clinical, like checking a box on a form. But to Emily, lying there with her body trembling from shock, it meant so much more. It meant acknowledging that the man she loved had tried to kill her. It meant dragging her private nightmare into the public, exposing herself to the judgment of strangers, to the rage of Daniel if he ever got free. It meant finality, and she wasn't ready for that. At the hospital, she gave statements between sobs. The officers wrote down details, nodding, but they asked again. Did she want to move forward? Did she want him arrested? Each time, she hesitated. Each time, she saw his face, not the monster from tonight, but the man who once held her hand in movie theaters, who kissed her forehead after long days, who whispered apologies after every cruel word. So she shook her head. "No, I don't want to press charges." The officers exchanged weary looks. They had seen this before too many times. Without her cooperation, their case would crumble. Evidence could show bruises, neighbors could testify to noise, but without the victim's voice, justice often slipped away. And so Daniel Ross walked free. In the days that followed, Emily told herself she'd made the right choice. He texted her, begged forgiveness, swore it would never happen again. He said he'd been drunk, stressed, out of control. He said he loved her, and a fragile part of her wanted to believe him, because believing meant she wasn't a fool, meant her years with him weren't wasted. She told her friends she was okay, told her mother she was fine, told herself the nightmare was over. But deep down, a shadow lingered. She had seen his eyes that night, wild and unrecognizable. She had felt his hands on her throat, pressing the life from her. She had heard the words he spat at her through clenched teeth, and shadows like that don't vanish. They wait. Emily had no idea that the worst was still to come, because Daniel wasn't finished. His rage hadn't burned out, it had only learned to bide its time. And when he came back, he would come back twice as dangerous. The second time, Emily felt fear claw its way up her spine. It wasn't in the chaos of flying fists or shattering glass, it was in the silence that followed. Silence can be heavier than screams, and in the weeks after Daniel's first attack, that silence grew unbearable. Her bruises faded, her throat healed, and to the outside world, she looked like a woman moving forward. She went back to work at the small insurance office downtown, smiled politely at coworkers, and assured her mother over the phone that everything was fine. But every knock at her door jolted her heart. Every unfamiliar car that slowed near her house pulled her back into the night. Trauma left her haunted, and it never traveled alone. Fear was its closest companion. Daniel stayed away for a time. Perhaps he was giving her space, or perhaps he was watching from afar, waiting for her defenses to crumble. When his number lit up her phone 2 weeks later, Emily's breath caught in her throat. The message was simple. "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" She didn't reply. But he didn't stop. Each day brought new texts, each one more desperate, more manipulative than the last. "I can't live without you. It was a mistake. You know I'd never hurt you like that again. If you don't answer me, I'll show up." The last one froze her blood. She deleted it immediately. But the word stayed with her like a brand. "I'll show up." And one night, he did. It was just after 11 p.m. when Emily heard the crunch of gravel in her driveway. Her heart hammered as headlights cut through her blinds. She didn't need to look to know it was him. Moments later, fists pounded on her door. "Emily, open up." Daniel's voice was slurred, thick with alcohol. "I just want to talk." She didn't move. She stayed curled on the couch, holding her breath as though silence could make her invisible. But Daniel wasn't a man who respected silence. The pounding grew harder. "Open the door, or I swear." A crash followed, the back door this time. Weaker than the front, the lock snapped, with splintering, and suddenly Daniel was inside. Emily bolted for the bedroom, dialing 911 with shaking fingers as she locked herself inside. Her whisper to the dispatcher was fractured by sobs. "He's here. He broken. Please hurry." On the other side of the door, Daniel's voice was venom. "You think you can ignore me? After everything I've done for you." The knob rattled, then the slam of his shoulder against the wood. The hinges groaned. "Stay with me," the operator urged. "Police are on their way." "Don't hang up." Emily pressed her back to the door, clutching the phone, tears streaking down her face. The pounding grew louder, then silence. For a moment, she thought maybe he'd fled again. Maybe the sirens approaching in the distance had scared him off. She dared to hope, but then the glass of her bedroom window shattered inward. Daniel's figure loomed in the darkness, climbing through with terrifying determination. Emily screamed. The phone clattered to the floor as she scrambled across the bed. But he was already on her. His weight crushed her chest, his hands wrapping once more around her throat. "Don't make me do this," he snarled, spit flying with his words. "If I can't have you, no one will." Her vision blurred again, panic surging as air slipped away. But this time, fate wasn't neighbors or pounding doors. It was flashing blue and red slicing through her curtains. Officers stormed the hallway, shouting commands. "Police, get off her." Daniel froze, breath ragged, eyes wild. Emily's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but only a broken whisper came out. Hands yanked Daniel away, slammed him to the floor, handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists. She gasped for air, her throat raw, her body trembling. A blanket once again. Paramedics once again. The same terrifying carousel spinning around her life. But this time, something was different. She had undeniable proof. Forced entry. Broken windows. The 911 call. Officers witnessing the assault themselves. It was a textbook case of attempted murder. They told her plainly at the hospital, "He's not going anywhere this time. We'll make sure of it." And yet, when the district attorney's office reached out to her days later, asking if she'd testify, asking if she was ready to press charges, Emily hesitated. The cycle of abuse is a web, and she was still tangled in its strands. Despite everything, she remembered his apologies, his tears, the years they had spent together. She remembered the man who laughed with her, not the man who nearly killed her. And buried deep in her chest was the most dangerous thought of all: maybe I can fix him. When she met with prosecutors, her voice was soft. "I don't want to go through with it," she said. I don't want to ruin his life." The attorney stared at her in disbelief. "Emily, he tried to kill you, Weiss." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know, but I love him." And just like that, the chance to stop him slipped away. Daniel Ross walked free again. The weeks after Daniel's release were a purgatory Emily could never escape. Freedom for him meant prison for her, a prison built of anxiety, of sleepless nights, of checking locks 3 times. Before bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even when no one was there. Trauma doesn't just live in memories. It lives in the body, in every tense muscle, in every jolt of panic at the sound of footsteps. Her friends begged her to move, to stay with family, to at least file for a restraining order. But Emily's heart was a battlefield. Love, fear, hope, and shame waged war inside her, leaving her paralyzed. The thought of standing in a courtroom, pointing at Daniel, and recounting each moment of terror, it felt unbearable. Daniel knew it, too, and he exploited it. He started small messages slipped into her mailbox, flowers left on her porch, voicemails full of weeping apologies. Then came the veiled threats. "If you really love me, you wouldn't let them take me away. You'll regret it if you turn on me." One night, she woke to find him standing in her yard, staring up at her window. No words, no gestures, just the silent reminder: "I'm still here." Emily called the police, voice shaking, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. The officer sighed as he took her statement. "Without charges or a restraining order, there's not much we can do." And so the pattern repeated: fear, silence, isolation. But what Emily didn't know was that Daniel's violence wasn't limited to her. As investigators would later uncover, his past was littered with warning signs: bar fights, threats against ex-girlfriends, a reputation for cruelty when alcohol coursed through his veins. He was a man who believed he could break rules without consequence, and twice now, Emily had unknowingly reinforced the belief by refusing to hold him accountable. One cold November night, her worst fears sharpened into reality. She came home from work, unlocked her door, and froze. The house wasn't how she'd left it. A drawer was pulled open, papers scattered. Herkin hid under the couch, eyes wide with terror. Then she heard it breathing. From the bedroom, her body locked up. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But before she could, Daniel stepped into the hallway. His face was calm, almost gentle, but his eyes burned with a terrifying intensity. "We need to talk," he said. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. "You can't be here," she whispered. He took a step closer. "I told you, I can't live without you. Why do you keep making me prove it?" The words sank like ice. Prove it. Prove it meant danger. Prove it meant control. Prove it meant this wasn't over. And as the night stretched on, Emily realized she was trapped in the cycle's darkest stage yet. Daniel wasn't just dangerous, he was determined. And determination in the hands of a man like him was a death sentence waiting to be carried out. The sound of his footsteps on her floor was worse than any nightmare Emily had ever endured. She stood frozen in the narrow hallway, her back pressed against the wall, her mind begging her legs to move. But terror has a way of paralyzing even the strongest survival instincts. Daniel's shadow loomed closer, stretching under the dim light like a predator closing in on prey. "We're not finished," he said, his voice low, almost tender, as though he were speaking to a lover and not the woman he had nearly strangled twice. Emily's lips trembled. "Please leave, Daniel, please." But Daniel wasn't here to leave. He stepped closer, and closer still, until she could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the twitch in his jaw, the storm brewing in his eyes. Then, in one swift motion, he slammed her against the wall. The impact rattled the picture frames and knocked the air from her lungs. "You think you can live without me?" His words were sharp, every syllable slicing into her. "You think you can just erase me from your life?" Emily shook her head, tears blurring her vision. She was trembling, not from disbelief anymore, but from resignation. This was who he was. This was what he would always be. And unless someone stopped him, her voice, broken but determined, slipped out like a lifeline. "I'm calling the police." Daniel's hand shot out, knocking the phone from her grip. It clattered to the floor, skidding out of reach. He pressed closer, his hands on her shoulders like iron shackles. "You wouldn't dare." But the truth was, she already had. The call connected the moment she dialed. The dispatcher hearing every crash, every muffled scream, every threat that left Daniel's mouth. Officers were already on their way. When the knock at the door came, Daniel stiffened. Emily seized her chance. With every ounce of strength left in her, she shoved him backward, tearing herself free just as the police burst in. Shouts filled the air. Orders barked with authority. Hands where we can see them, down on the ground. For a moment, Daniel considered running, but the sight of drawn weapons froze him in place. He was dragged down, handcuffed, the rage still burning in his eyes as he spat. "You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret it." Her knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, sobbing, as paramedics rushed to her side once again. But this time, there was no question, no hesitation, no second chances. With the 911 recording, the witness officers, the signs of forced entry, prosecutors had more than enough to move forward. Even without Emily's cooperation, the state would press charges. And yet, deep down, Emily felt the crushing weight of fear. Because she knew Daniel, and Daniel wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat quietly. The trial hadn't even begun, and already the war for her survival had entered its deadliest stage. The courtroom smelled of old wood and stale coffee. The air heavy with the weight of justice or the illusion of it. Emily sat in the witness box, hands trembling in her lap, as the prosecutor guided her through the events that had nearly taken her life. Her voice cracked, her throat still bearing faint marks of the violence that haunted her. Across the room, Daniel sat at the defense table, clean-shaven, dressed in a suit that didn't fit his rage. His eyes never left her, even as his lawyer objected, argued, painted him as a misunderstood man struggling with demons. Daniel's gaze bore into Emily like a brand. "He looks at me like I belong to him," she confided to a victim advocate during a break. "Like no matter what happens, I'll never be free." The trial was grueling. Prosecutors played the 911 call, her voice shaking with terror, the crash of glass echoing through the recording. Jurors winced as they heard Daniel's snarled threats. "If I can have you, no one will." Neighbors testified to hearing her screams. Officers testified to pulling Daniel off her body. The evidence was damning, and yet defense attorneys spun their web. They painted Daniel as a man who drank too much but loved deeply, a man provoked by rejection, a man who needed treatment not punishment. They pointed to Emily's past refusals to press charges, suggesting that perhaps this wasn't as clear-cut as the state made it out to be. But Emily's testimony cut through the noise. Her voice broke as she said the words out loud. "He tried to kill me, not once, twice. And if he's given the chance, he'll try again." The jury deliberated for less than a day. When the verdict was read guilty on multiple counts of attempted murder, burglary, and assault, Emily felt a wave of relief crash over her. Tears streamed down her face as she exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Daniel's reaction was not relief, but rage. He shot to his feet, his voice booming in the courtroom before marshals restrained him. "This isn't over. You'll pay for this." The judge's gavel slammed down, the room descending into chaos. But Emily's ears rang with those words. "This isn't over. And as the sentence was handed down, 30 years without parole, she tried to convince herself that it truly was, that bars and walls would keep him away, that justice had finally prevailed. But justice, she would soon learn, doesn't always silence ghosts. In the months that followed, Emily tried to rebuild. She moved to a new home, changed her phone number, sought therapy. She walked through grocery aisles without scanning every face, slept without checking locks 3 times. Slowly, she began to feel human again. But scars don't fade easily, and fear has a way of whispering even in moments of peace. At night, she still woke sweating from dreams of his hands around her throat in crowded places. She sometimes swore she saw his face, and in her darkest moments, she wondered if he'd ever truly be gone. Letters from prison confirmed her fears. Daniel never stopped writing. Pages of apologies, confessions of undying love, promises that he'd find her again one day. They were intercepted, of course, but each one reminded Emily that his obsession hadn't died with his freedom. She spoke at victim panels, warning others about the dangers of silence, about the weight of choices not to press charges. Her voice was steady, but inside she wrestled with guilt. How many times had she let him walk away? How many chances had she given him to finish what he started? One evening, as the sun set behind her new home, Emily sat on the porch with a cup of tea, breathing in the calm. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future, one where she was safe, one where she was free. But then she remembered his words, spoken in court, shouted through clenched teeth. This isn't over. And though 30 years of concrete and steel separated them, though justice had finally claimed him, Emily knew that monsters like Daniel never really disappeared. They lingered in shadows, and memories, and scars that whispered when the world was quiet. She had survived him twice, but survival was not the same as freedom. And as the night fell, Emily realized the truth. Some nightmares don't end when you wake up. They live with you forever.